For folks who've seen it, No Other Land was an incredible documentary. But of course, that's the West Bank, that's not Gaza. But I bring it up to say, I don't know what will happen to Gaza, and to this point, I don't know what's going to happen to the West Bank, and there is no uniform Palestinian, not Palestinian Authority, but no, in a general sense, there's no unifying political movement between the people or the diaspora. There's no one who really speaks for Palestinian identity, and I guess that's sort of one part of what I'm about to ask, which is, when the war first started, and it was bad at first, I thought to myself, you know what, this actually might reinvigorate a two-state solution only for the reason that these are not people that I think could live together anymore. And I realize that there are people of Palestinian ancestry who live in Israel proper, what they call Israel proper, but in general, the people who are being military occupied, they cannot, these are not people that can live side by side. And there was a lot of people who I think shared that opinion. And now I'm at the place where it just looks to me like they're trying to erase the very notion of what it means to be Palestinian completely. They want to turn it into Kurdistan, which simply does not exist, right? Do you share that assessment? What is your sense of what happens to Palestinian sovereignty and the cause behind it?
Yeah, this is the $64,000 question, especially with the Trump administration. Trump has surprisingly indicated that he's willing to stand up to Netanyahu in a way that Biden never did. It's kind of really shocking.
It could be a ruse.
Yeah,
it could be a ruse for Iran saber rattling. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the thing is what I imagine is happening. There was a pretty high-profile firing of Mike Waltz from the administration on the grounds that he was working with Netanyahu too closely to try to drag the U.S. into direct military confrontation with Iran. So it's clear that Trump is not fully down with Israel's vision for how the U.S. should interact with the region. The U.S. took on the burden of bombing Yemen, a completely pointless bombing campaign because Yemen had been bombed by Saudi Arabia for nearly a decade without that producing any result, with U.S. support and Israeli support and everything else. And finally, Trump put his foot down, and I'm watching Israeli commentators kind of melt down about saying, we're going to cut a deal with the Houthis in Yemen so that they don't attack American ships, we don't attack Yemen, but the Houthis are still free to fire rockets at Israel. That confrontation between the Houthis and Israel is completely separate from the American agreement. So the U.S. saying, we're taking a step back, you guys do your thing, you figure it out between the two of you. That really pissed Israel off. And this whole conversation about coming to an agreement with Iran, there was an agreement with Iran that restricted them from ever having a nuke. It was the Obama deal, the Obama nuclear deal. Trump came along and tore it up under pressure from, it's what Israel wanted and the Israel lobby in the US, because it was not enough for them that Iran does not develop a nuclear weapon. What they wanted is a complete and total Iranian submission to Israeli regional dominance. That's what they wanted. And Iran was not playing ball. They were giving money and weapons to groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and others. And Trump now is indicating that he's effectively going to go back to something that is similar to the Obama deal. He's no longer looking for this complete submission from Iran that Israel wanted. Israel is trying to push Trump towards bombing Iranian nuclear sites and engaging fully in this war. And Trump is saying, no, we're going to look for a diplomatic solution. We're going to talk. And there's indications that these talks are productive and moving in a certain direction. I would never rule out the possibility that these talks break down and we do head towards a catastrophic regional war. But these are two elements of Trump showing that he can disregard what Netanyahu wants in order to favor American interests. The problem is that what happens to Palestinians is not of significant concern for Trump. That's the really deeply disturbing part, is that when Miriam Adelson gives $100 million to the Trump campaign and says what she's interested in is allowing Israel to annex the West Bank, I worry that the bone that Trump throws to Israel is do whatever you want with the West Bank and Gaza. That's for you to figure out. What we care about is not being dragged into a war and cutting this deal with Iran and so on. In that sense, I don't know what the future of Palestine would be from here. It is unquestionably a dark moment because Israel sees the shifting public opinion. They know that they don't have a green light to do whatever they want forever. They can feel the shifting winds, and they feel an urgency to act now while they have Trump in office, who's going to probably sign off on whatever they want to do in Palestine, to do their worst. And I worry that their worst is eliminating Palestinians entirely so that the prospect of Palestinian, it becomes museums effectively when you talk about what Palestine was as opposed to a nation that can really survive and rebuild itself and reestablish itself. Palestinians deserve to be a free people in their land, and Israel does not see them as equal human beings, which has always been the fundamental problem, and Israel is feeling the urgency to act on that dehumanization. We're watching the most monstrous levels of it currently unfolding in Gaza, but they're already doing it in the West Bank too.
It's a slow
Yeah.
bleed.
Yeah, and the Hamas excuse in the West Bank does not exist, but that has not stopped Israel from killing hundreds of Palestinians in the West Bank, from killing Palestinian-Americans. There's a 14-year-old boy, Rabia, something I don't remember what his first name was, just before Netanyahu visited Washington, not even a month ago. This American kid was killed by the Israeli military, allegedly for throwing rocks. I don't know if he was throwing rocks or not. If he was, it certainly does not justify spraying him with bullets. This is happening in Palestinian territory that Israel has no right to be in the first place. Israeli occupation there is illegal. This American kid gets killed and nobody talks about it. It doesn't come up with a press conference. No journalist says, what about the American kid that was killed? And you can imagine if any other government had killed an American child, that would be the only topic of conversation. And yet, because Israel did it, we don't have a conversation about it. And that is what's worrying about this political moment, is, where we started the conversation. Palestinian life doesn't matter. And with Israel worrying about whether that's going to continue to be the case in the future, what are they going to do in the meantime, and what is Trump going to allow them to do? The stakes could not possibly be higher about what we're talking about here.
You mentioned something domestically. I'm going to read you another stat here. 53. This comes from I think Pew Research. 53% of Americans have an unfavorable view of Israel. That's more broadly. That was 42% in 2022. The Pew survey findings show that young Americans are even less well disposed to the Jewish state. Most respondents also don't want the U.S. to take over Gaza. Obviously, we are dealing with a situation where, we have a gerontocracy here. So we have people who, again, have a different sense of what Israel meant to them in their life versus now. That's a big issue. The other one is, as you mentioned, the Israeli lobby has effective outreach to both and influence over both of the parties. However, there has been something of a sea change with younger voters. Yeah. I wonder what you think those seeds that have been planted in terms of what you can see with public opinion, especially with the young, what electoral fruit one way or the other that bears.
Yeah, I think the future is bright, and in the meantime, we're in a horror show, and it feels like a race against time. American policy towards Israel is unsustainable. I have almost no doubt that in 20 years, we're looking at a fundamentally different relationship and policy. The question is, does Palestine survive for 20 years? That's the question. At this point, it's difficult to imagine what a two-state solution would even look like, given the extent of Israel's takeover of Palestinian areas, whether we're looking potentially at the complete fall of the Zionist project, which is to say the end of Israeli apartheid between the river and the sea, and the possibility of one person, one vote. That is certainly the vision that we have in the United States. It's a non-starter for Israel, but are we beginning to see a shift that would change that for the rest of the world? Because it may be a non-starter for Israel, but if the rest of the world is not willing to tolerate this apartheid regime continuing to exist, what does that future look like without this unrelenting U.S. military and diplomatic backing? All these are just very wide open questions. Where a friend of mine used the term recently, which I thought was very interesting, sort of accentuated equilibrium, disequilibrium. It's a moment in which the world takes a particular shape, and it's the status quo. And then something really traumatic and big happens, and it's in a moment of disequilibrium, and it's slowly reshaping to hold back together. But until it does, everybody's all in on trying to shape what that freezing is going to look like, because once it freezes, it's probably going to be stuck that way for a while. And we're in that moment of disequilibrium in which it seems like anything is possible, and we don't know how things are going to reshape. We just know that the Israeli government, holding the immense power that it does, is just unleashing unspeakable violence in this moment to try to shape the refreeze in a way that would be favorable to Israel. Even if the political winds shift against them, they want to have imposed the reality on the ground that they want, which is maximum Israeli control over land and minimum number of Palestinians existing on it.